to start.
Okay, I'm Orville Carter, and I was born in 1922 and lived in Allen County for well, I don't know how many years, but in the meantime I've been all over we moved to Denver and everywhere else. But I suppose what you really were wondering about was the starting of the war. That's the main thing that I can kind of picture. And I enlisted in the service in 1942, and in Lincoln, and then they sent me to California, Chico, California, an air base, and they never did tell me what I was going to do, but it was there were 3 squadrons there, and we were going to be we started the new squadron, and I was trained as a mechanic. I went back to New York and went to school to be a mechanic, that sort of thing, and then I had basic trainers. I never went overseas. There was a reason for that, because I was the crew chief, and I had 3 boys on my crew, and we went up to sign up because there was a sign on the offices about going overseas. Well, we thought we'd been there a year, and it would be time. Well, my father went overseas in World War I, so we went up to sign up, and the captain told us. He said, "Let me get this book out." And he showed us the book, and he said, "Now here's so and so and so and so. They've already signed up, and they're gone. But," he said, "I'm going to tell you something else. You boys just well go to work, because by then I had my own planes to take care of, and my own crew, and they said, we know what you're doing. We're keeping them going, and you're doing a good job. So you just forget about it. There's no use coming back here because you're not going to sign up." So that was. Well, it was a mixed emotion. We thought we should maybe have been overseas, and yet, of course, I wasn't wild about, none of us were, about going, but we thought we should. And now, you asked me about if I knew anything about the Blue Rapids people being out on that air base. They were. And I didn't know at the time that they were there. I could have been a year after I was there that I found out that they were in a different squadron. But one of them, and so help me, I can't remember what his name was, one of the Thompsons, the boy, young, well, not really young even. He was probably in his late 20s when he was enlisted. And he was in the guardhouse. I have no idea, but I found out that I went and talked to him, but I never tried to find out why he was there. And it wasn't until awfully long until he got out. And then there was another one that he stole some gasoline. He had his dad's bought him an old, well, not an old, but a little truck. And he had in the back of the truck, he had a 30-gallon tank, and he got on the back of the where the gas pumps were on the trucks. And he was filling up his 30-gallon barrel when the OD went by, and he knew it. The OD never really didn't want to cause trouble, but there were 3 or 4 of them that same time in a line filling up another tank. And he came back, and they were still doing it. So they put him in the brig in the guardhouse. And I can't really think there was anything. I did probably get to be on this air base. They got the first jets that I know of out of Bell Aircraft, and they were called P-59s. They were twin-engine, inline. Of course, they were jets, but I didn't have anything to do with them. I just was there and noticed the smell. It smelled like kerosene all the time. That's what they burned. I guess that's what it was. But I started out with training planes. And then we went into P-38s and P-51s. We ended up with P-51s because the war was over about the time we got them. So, and I was crew chief of the P-51s also. I can't think of anything extra that I could.
When were you? 1945 is when you got out of the service.
I got home in 1945.
And you came home to Irving?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we lived in Marysville just for a short time because I didn't have any home of my own then at that time. So then we went to Irving and I bought a house, and we lived there for 6 or 7 years.
This would be you and your family, your wife,
my wife and we had Connie at that time.
Okay.
She was just a child, and we lived there until Mike had to be born there. I'd forgotten that it was him. And when he was born, he was born in 1950. So that was he that when we came to take him to the hospital, and I don't think he was born at that time, but we did. We thought he was going to be. So we got to the bridge over here, and it wasn't finished, and they put 2 planks up from the ground over to the bridge and let us drive to Marysville, which was pretty nice for us. But I believe, as I remember right, he went, but we didn't stay. We came back through Frankfurt, and that had to be. He was born in October, so it would had to have been later that the bridge was completed. I don't know whether you know that or not.
November 2, I think we have
okay,
a November 2 article.
Well, this would have been in October
that
I stopped and we went on the bridge. It wasn't finished. It was pretty well finished, but that was it.
So when you got home from the war, were things a lot different?
Well, it was for me, because when I left, I worked for Armoring Company in Marysville when I left, when I enlisted. But if you enlisted, it doesn't guarantee you a job. If I would have been drafted, then I could have gone back to work for Armors. But they were, my job was filled up by then, so I went down to Irving and worked at Hannon's meat locker.
Hannon's?
Hannon's,
Oh, Hannon's, okay.
Yeah. For 8 or 10 years. And then we weren't exactly satisfied with the wages, so I went down to Chapman and ran a grocery store for a little over a year, and they decided that maybe they could pay more money, so they paid me quite a bit to come back. So we stayed there then until we moved up here. I bought Fred Cottrell's house after they had moved to Marysville. And in my mind, I thought Fred was dead then, but maybe not.
Fred Cottrell's house was located where?
In Irving. And
okay.
I don't know how to tell you. I don't even know where.
Well, okay, so it was Fred Cottrell House in Irving you bought.
It's where he'd lived for years, all of my time.
Same fellow that had the round barn?
He had a round barn and one arm.
Round barn, one arm. Okay.
He lost it in, I believe, in a corn chiller, if I'm not mistaken. That's been so long, but I think, and it was above the elbow. So his pride and joy was to be able to play baseball, but after that, of course, there's no way he could play with one arm. So he never got to do that anymore.
And what was the address of the house that you moved up? Where's that house?
You mean after we moved?
The one you moved up here?
708 East Avenue. And let's see.
That'd be back behind, right across from where Lawless's used to live.
Right
Big
across
square.
the street. Right across the street.
Okay.
And then in my wife had cancer and had surgery, lived 2 years, and in 1967 she passed away. And the boys and I had the 3 boys, and Connie by then was gone. She and her husband were over in Germany at that time, and then we lived there by ourselves for how many years? I suppose 5. Anyway, we were born in Marjorie Miller had lost her husband about the same time, and I really never knew her that well, but she's related to my family and a long ways away. But we met anyhow, and we're married, like I say, in 72.
1972,
Mhm.
okay.
And by then I was carrying mail. And we lived in Blue Rapids how many years? We went through the storm.
Three.
Was that when 72? We went through the ice storm?
That was in 74,
Okay.
that hailstorm.
The
The
hailstorm.
real bad storm we had.
And
We moved,
broke. We had great big windows on the north. Well, I say great big, not terribly, but and they all broke out in ice and glass and everything in the house. We suffered through that, and then we had to move to Leonardville because they had two of us carrying mail, the mail route, and rural. And Dale Wanamaker he'd been there for many more years than I had, so they decided that they'd combine the routes, and I had to move. So then I went to Leonardville, and that's where I finished up my mail carrying, 85, you suppose? I think 1985, and I finally retired after death, except she worked for Bank of America in California, in Chico, where we lived. So, see, I didn't have a rank when I went in the service, and I was a corporal when she went in, so they didn't start paying the housing and the food and that sort of stuff until you were a sergeant. And it was another year or so before we were poor. That was all.
You lived on base?
No, this. Well, yes, I did,
Okay.
but of course she didn't. And but I wasn't. I never even had a first class pass. They wouldn't give us a first class pass until we would. I don't know. Maybe after 3 years they might have. I can't remember when you got it, but I never got a first class pass until I was a sergeant. And I went into town a few times more than I should have, because when I was in school, I was interested. I mean, I really worked and really fought it, and I wrote until I could. I mean, I was as good a penman probably as better than they have nowadays around here. So we had to go every day to the orderly room, get our pass from the lieutenant to sign it, and then we weren't supposed to stay all night even. We were just supposed to have a pass till midnight, and we had to come back out. Well, Orville, there happened to be a pad there with what they wrote all these the overnight deals, and I just helped myself to them, and noticed the lieutenant's name, how he wrote it, and from then on I didn't come back home. I mean, back to the base. I waited until the next day till everybody else came like I did, and that was great. But one time I forgot to not turn it in. See, you don't, when you write somebody else's name, you don't write it in so they know it. They just, it looked like it was okay. But actually, if they'd have checked the papers at the office, they'd have found out I didn't have a pass. So, one time I forgot it and just put it in with the rest of the guys like I had been doing. And I thought, oh man, they're gonna find it. Well, I never did. So,
So you said a first class pass, you didn't have it?
didn't have I don't know,
That would allow you to have more liberties, to do things?
well, yeah,
Okay.
and we could stay all night when they got a first class
Okay,
pass.
that was all.
And that was when a sergeant, or maybe 3 years, being married before you get in the Army, which I wasn't.
Mm.
So, we were married after I was in the service.
Mhm.
And we rented a little, well, it was a nice apartment as far as that's concerned, but it was above a garage. And they weren't like they are now. We had a hot water heater that it was nice, but we had to light the it had a pilot. I didn't mean that, but we had to turn it on when we wanted hot water, or else just leave it down low. So you had to be careful not to turn it up and go to town. And one time I did, and I come home and we had hot water in the cold spout and in the hot spout and everywhere else because it was just steaming. I don't know why it didn't blow up, but we had a nice place to live, and we got by when she was working. Well, then it was okay, but I would like to have had my first class pass just like everybody else, and I thought I deserved one. Well, I had staff sergeants on my crew when I was a corporal, and that's not the way things are done. But there were a bunch of the other officers, the other squadrons, I should say, came back up to where I was, and they didn't have any place to put these guys, so they put them on our crews. And I thought at that time that, because I had to take care of all the books on every airplane had a book, and it had to be kept, how when it went up, when it come back, and then what we did about repairs, gasoline, oil, all that. And that was my job, to see that every one of those were done before I left. And I thought somebody that was making more money than I was should be responsible, but it never happened. So.
How many were you in charge of? How many planes?
Well, it varied.
Oh, very.
Some of them could be in the depot being worked on, or honest to God, I'm not sure. I'd say 10 or 12. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a camera. We didn't have cameras. So the only one I know of that really was taken, that I did, was after Connie was born. I was crewing P-38 at that fighter plane, and so I wrote her name, painted her name on the side of the cowl of the airplane.
Hmm.
But
do you have a picture of that?
Yeah. Well, I think so. moving. Why? I'm sure we do.
Terry has them.
I know.
Oh.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Terry probably. So I don't know of anything else. I do know that I was in the Army, in the Air Corps, for 3 months, and let's see. Well, yeah, 3 months I believe, and I came home on furlough, and we, maybe not that long, we talked about getting married. So I went back out, and my parents and my dad at that time wasn't well, and they were going to come out and visit, so they brought Donna with them, and so they gave me a 15-day furlough. And at the end of 15 days, well, the master sergeant told me, he said, when you get back, when you're ready to go, when your folks are ready, well, he said, come back and tell me when it is. And he said, I'll get ready for you. So at the end of 14 days, I went out and told him, I said, well, I'll be here in the morning. And we visited a little bit, and he asked me if I was interested in going with them. They were coming home, and I said, well, I just got through off my 50-day furlough. And he said, well, I can arrange it. And if you want to, he said, you can have another 15 days. So I was off 30 days. And that's when we were married, when he come home. And then I went back by myself. And because she had things to do, and she was working for, I think we were talking about John Cottrell. I think John Cottrell at that time, the older John Cottrell from Irving, was at a head of a finance or something like that office in Marysville, where they put the paper out now, in that same building. And so she gave them time enough for us to get away. And 6 maybe at the most, 25 possibly. my mother wasn't well. They ran a dairy in just north of Iola, Kansas, and sold the milk at Iola. So my dad's cousin and my dad decided they'd take their families, our families, and they would go to Arizona with us because I don't know how he could get away, what a job he had. But anyway, we got somewhere into the mountains, and I don't know where, but we weren't to Pueblo yet. And we met a family of Indians. And it's vague. It might have been 15 of them, and they had horses coming down the hill, and we were going up. And we camped there, and there were no motels or anything like that, of course. And I ate with those people, and stew. And my dad told me, he said, well, you know probably what they're eating, and of course it made a difference to me. And he said, well, 9 times out of 10, it's probably they've come along, and if they see a stray dog, why at that time they were poor. They didn't have anything, just those little horses and rags. So I thought perhaps I had eaten dog, and I didn't want to do it again. But then it wasn't too long after that my dad's cousin was ahead of him, and we went through a little town, and some man come out with a net, and he waving that old net around. He come right out in front of my dad's cousin, and he hit him, and he hit his head upon the what do I want to say? You'd probably know. Radiator cap. There was a cap on the front of the radio, those old radiators of the old car, right in front. And this man, he hit on that radiator cap, and it killed him. So it upset this family of my dad's, so bad that they didn't go any further. He couldn't drive, and of course the ladies didn't drive in those years. I guess they didn't, but because I don't know where they came back. They came back here, and we went on. And then my dad got a job, and why they stopped, I'm not sure, but he got a job at Pueblo in the ironworks or whatever it was they had, I'm not sure. And most of those people were from Italy, Italians. So I guess we call them Dagos, you know. I mean, in those days it didn't make any difference. Nobody cared what you called them. But we were there for most of the winter. And for some reason, they decided they'd come back to Kansas, so that's where we did. We left there and came back to Kansas when I was, I don't know. Well, I do too know. I wasn't, we ended up down at Hawkinson's, down at Cleburne. Worked for J.A. Hawkinson. He, at that time, he was the senator in that area. And my dad, he had a lot of land, a lot of cattle, and my dad worked there for most of a year. And I started school there when I was 5, 4 actually, I think, but early. And then we went over to Bigelow when I was 6 years old. They wouldn't let me go to school until I was 6. And the people who lived up on the hill from us, when we lived in Bigelow, were the Capitans. And they were all musicians. And the main thing I can remember, we were just there for a year or so in Bigelow before we moved to. My dad was on the railroad then. He got his job in the railroad, and we moved to Irving. But the Captain family, in the summertime, that was one of the things that we really enjoyed, was the fact that their whole family played instruments, and they lived up on the hill, and we could hear it down there in the valley, those people playing, and that was really something. They were good, all of them. The old well, I want to say bass horn, the oompa horn. One of them played that in that, I guess it was what you'd call a band, but and that's enough to. I think I was 3. I went to the neighbors. We were living with my grandparents, my father's parents, and he he was oh, what I want to say, for the township maintainer, and in charge of the building roads and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I went to the neighbors. They had two boys my age, one of them a little older, maybe both. And we played a lot together. For some reason or other, we got into a squabble, and we threw dirt, and my aunt heard us fighting, and so she came and got me, and I can remember she put me over her shoulder, and I was furious about having to leave because I wasn't through. And I had new words. They told me later that I called those kids that I never knew I had. You know what I mean? It didn't mean anything to me, but I called them those names, and my aunt reminded me of that many years. But then the next thing I remember, and this will finish this deal. We moved across the block, no, excuse me, north from where my grandparents lived, and my dad started farming. And this is a little tiny town, and down for 50 people, still there. And my dad brought home a coyote, baby coyote, and I raised that thing until, probably 4 or 5 months old. Not very old, because I was playing, and when I came back, why, the coyote wasn't there. And I asked Mother where the coyote was, and she said, oh, he had an accident. And I said, what? And of course, that really upset me. And I know this is one of her little fibs, little lies, but she said, well, I can remember we had well, I would say,
Clock shelf.
huh?
Clock shelf.
Yeah, shelf.
For lamp.
And the lamp was on the shelf, and she said something happened. It bumped that lamp, and it fell off and landed right on the dog's head, or the thing's head, and killed it. So, and at that time, I thought maybe that's what happened, and I'm sure it wasn't. I never knew whatever happened to it, but there was something happened every place I went to me, and to my kids. It's interesting, that, yeah.
Tell us about it.